Welcome, children, to day 4 of our psychology class. Hope you've revised the previous chapter. Please be ready with a register and pen and take down important points. The second chapter deals with self and personality. Self and personality refer to the characteristic ways in which we define our existence. They also refer to the ways in which our experiences are organized and show up in our behavior. From common observation, we know that different people hold different ideas about themselves. These ideas represent the self of a person. We also know that different people behave in different ways in a given situation. But the behavior of a particular person from one situation to another generally remains fairly stable. Such a relatively stable pattern of behavior represents the personality of that person. Thus, different persons seem to possess different personalities. These personalities are reflected in the diverse behavior of persons. From the time we gain a certain sense of awareness about ourselves or consciousness about ourselves, we spend a lot of time thinking about who we are and how we are different from others. A newly born child has no idea of its self. As a child grows older, the idea of self emerges and its formation begins. Parents, friends, teachers, and other significant persons play a vital role in shaping a child's ideas about self. Our interaction with other people, our experiences, and the meaning we give to them serve as the basis of our self. The structure of self is modifiable in the light of our own experiences and the experiences we have of other people. Let's do a small activity to understand self. Time yourself and write down 10 sentences starting with the words I am. You can pause the video and finish the activity before you move ahead. If you notice carefully and look at the sentences you've written, you will see that they are a fairly long list of attributes about how you identify yourselves. The attributes used for identification tell us about our personal and social or cultural identity. Personal identity refers to those attributes of a person that make him or her different from others. For example, I am, you can put your name there, or I am honest or hardworking, or I am a singer or dancer. He or she in these sentences is disclosing his or her personal identity. Social identity refers to those aspects of a person that link him or her to a social or cultural group or are derived from it. When someone says he or she is an Indian or is a Sikh, they are trying to indicate their social identity. These descriptions characterize the way people mentally represent themselves as a person. When we look at it overall, self refers to the totality of an individual's conscious experiences, ideas, thoughts, and feelings with regard to himself or herself. These experiences and ideas define the existence of an individual both at the personal and at social levels. In the activity that we did, there are two ways in which we could have written about ourselves. Firstly, we write about ourselves as someone who is doing something. For example, I am eating. Here, I am doing something. On the other hand, we can write about ourselves as someone to whom something is being done. For example, if someone is appreciating me, then here I am not doing anything, but I am in turn being appreciated. Something is being done to me. This means that self can be understood as a subject as well as an object. When you say, I know who I am, the self is being described as a knower as well as something that can be known. As a subject, the self actively engages in the process of knowing itself. As an object, the self gets observed and comes to be known. This dual status of self should always be kept in mind. There are several kinds of self. They get formed as a result of our interactions with our physical and socio-cultural environments. A distinction is made between personal and social self. The personal self leads to an orientation in which one feels primarily concerned with oneself. Here, emphasis is laid on those aspects of life that relate only to the concerned person, like personal freedom, personal responsibility, personal achievement, or personal comforts. The social self emerges in relation with others and emphasizes such aspects of life as cooperation, unity, affiliation, sacrifice, support, or sharing. This self values family and social relationships. Hence, it is also referred to as familial or relational self. Now that we have looked at different aspects and kinds of self, we are going to look at the cognitive and behavioral aspects of self. These are the self concept, self esteem, self efficacy, and self regulation, under which we will also talk about self control. The way we perceive ourselves and the ideas we hold about our competencies and attributes is also called self concept. At a very general level, this view of oneself is overall either positive or negative. At a more specific level, a person may have a very positive view of his or her athletic bravery, but a negative view of his or her academic talents. At an even more specific level, one may have a positive self concept about one's reading ability, but a negative one about one's mathematical skills. Finding out an individual's self concept is not easy. The most frequently used method involves asking the person about himself or herself. Self esteem is an important aspect of ourself. As persons, we always make some judgment about our own value or worth. This value judgment of a person about himself or herself is called self esteem. Some people have high self esteem, whereas others have low self esteem. Studies indicate that by the age of 6 to 7, children seem to have formed self esteem in at least 4 areas: academic competence, social competence, physical or athletic competence, and physical appearance, which become more refined with age. Self esteem is strongly related to our everyday behavior. For example, children with high academic self esteem perform better in schools than those with low academic self esteem. And children with high social self esteem are more liked by their peers than those with low social self esteem. On the other hand, Children with low self esteem in all areas are often found to display anxiety, depression, and increasing antisocial behavior. Self efficacy is another important aspect of our self. People differ in the extent to which they believe they themselves control their life outcomes or the outcomes are controlled by luck or fate or other situational factors. A person who believes that he or she has the ability or behaviors required by a particular situation demonstrates high self efficacy. The notion of self efficacy is based on Bandura's social learning theory. Bandura's initial studies showed that children and adults learned behavior by observing and imitating others. A strong sense of self efficacy allows people to select, influence, and even construct the circumstances of their own life. Self efficacy can be developed. Our society, our parents, and our own positive experiences can help in the development of a strong sense of self efficacy by presenting positive models during the formative years of children. Self regulation refers to our ability to organize and monitor our own behavior. People who are able to change their behavior according to the demands of the external environment are high on self monitoring. Many situations of life require resistance to situational pressures and control over ourselves. Learning to delay or defer the gratification of needs is called self control. Self control plays a key role in the fulfillment of long term goals. A number of psychological techniques of self control have also been suggested. Observation of behavior is one of them. Self instruction is another important technique, and self reinforcement or rewarding oneself is another technique. Several aspects of self seem to be linked to the characteristic features of the culture in which an individual lives. Analysis of self carried out in the Indian cultural context reveals a number of important features that are distinct from those found in the Western cultural context. Let us now look at how the culture and self are related. The most important distinction between the Indian and the Western view is that in the way the boundary is drawn between self and the other. In the Western view, this boundary appears to be relatively fixed. The Indian view of self, on the other hand, is characterized by the shifting nature of this boundary. In the Western culture, the self and the group exist as two different entities with clearly defined boundaries. Individual members of the group maintain their individuality. In the Indian culture, the self is generally not separated from one's own group. Rather, both remain in a state of harmonious coexistence. In the Western culture, on the other hand, they often remain at a distance. That is why many Western cultures are characterized as individualistic, whereas many Asian cultures are characterized as collectivistic. I hope, children, that you've understood the concepts done so far. Let's do a short recap. Today we have began our new lesson, which is self and personality. Under this, we've talked about the concept of self and its different aspects and kinds, like personal identity, social identity, self as the subject and object, the different kinds of self, that is, personal self and social self, the different cognitive and behavioral aspects of self, like self concept, self esteem, self efficacy, self regulation, And lastly, we have talked about how culture is related to self.